So welcome to the This Is My Lockdown podcast, and this is our 6th episode, and it's been quite an interesting journey, hasn't it? And today I have again with me Roger Moore, Nikki Tapper, and Professor Robert Beckford, and our podcast, the This Is My Lockdown podcast, is to create safe spaces for us to talk about mental health and well-being within our Black community. I'm tired of the term lockdown, and I don't particularly like it, and I don't even know what version of lockdown we're in, but Boris says we're getting out soon, so we're looking forward to that. But I recently found out that a lockdown is synonymous with a safe space. And really, that's what we are trying to create here, a safe space where we can have conversations about Black mental health and resilience and the issues within our community that have to do with mental health and well-being, and really transform the narrative regarding mental illness within the Black community, because we know there's a lot of stigma and discrimination. But what we hope to create in these safe spaces is discussions that will inspire us to prioritize our well-being, physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually, realize the strengths and capabilities within our Black communities, and break the stigma surrounding mental health. So I'm excited that you've all joined me today. And again, my name is Angela Kuma, and this is My Lockdown. We're proudly sponsored by the Big Lottery Community Fund and the This Is My City brand. We'll start with introductions. So who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll just say it quickly. My name is Roger Moore. I do a number of stuff. Everyone knows me for a lot of the urban gospel events that I've done in the past, and for me, just making music creativity, not only music itself, but this creativity palatable for each generation. So, you know, I may do music which you think my generation wouldn't like, but I do it because it's palatable for the next generation to pass a message through a palatable form, whether it's poetry, whatever it is, music, visuality, and to look at also the economic side of music, and actually, you know, picking up Black music as well through different things I do with radio and stuff.
Okay. And I'm Nikki Tapper. I've been a radio presenter for, over 20 odd years now. I started off by presenting gospel music, but my main profession was really in teaching. I became a senior teacher and manager within a pupil referral unit, gave that up a few years ago. Where are we now? No, September 2019, to pursue being self-employed and use my my teaching and presenting the world of radio and broadcasting to support those who lack the confidence. And then, of course, lovely COVID, it's like, you know, and that's thrown things in the main. But I suppose I'm now feeling much more comfortable to celebrate the fact that I'm a Black woman of Christian faith, but not the Christian faith that says it will all be well by and by, just pray, Rob babe, rum on it, and thank you, Jesus. But to be challenged more, and to challenge those who don't know how loving the faith of Christianity can be and how loving God is in that sense. So I'm really pleased to continue and to have more conversations about how we can really make an impact, especially when we have, as Robert's already shared, you know, that background of coming from a race that has been told you're nothing.
Yeah.
To introduce myself,
yes,
3 A's. Firstly, I'm an academic. My day job is in teaching. I'm currently Professor of Black Theology at the Queen's Ecumenical Foundation and VU University in Amsterdam, and I will be taking up a new post in a couple of months as Professor of the Professor and also Director of the Institute of Ethics and Environmental Justice at the University of Winchester. So that's my day job. My other job is, and I would say this in terms of faith, I'm a progressive. I've come to understand the biblical tradition to be an inclusive tradition that welcomes people no matter what race, class, gender, sexual orientation. It's about where faith takes them to, which is important. So I see myself as a progressive, always pushing the boundaries of what salvation means and what salvation is about. And the other A I would say is I am an artist in the sense that I write, had a background in television when I was younger and prettier, and now do most of my creative work in culture. So you may not have heard of my album, Roger, the Jamaican Bible Remix.
I've heard it. I see. You did a music video from it as well, innit?
Yeah, that's it. Plenty. There's a whole heap. There's about 5 music videos. So part of my work now is audio culture, and most of my documentary work is with BBC Radio World Service. The last one was on COVID and Black people and healing traditions. It was called Will God Protect Me, went out on BBC World Service a couple of months ago. And before that, we had another one on which was an independent production, which was called Better Must Come, Black Pentecostals, the Pandemic and the Future of Christianity. So most of the work now artistically is done in audio culture.
Wow. Okay. Again, I'm the novice here, so I'm just going to ask the questions and then have an interesting discussion. But today we're going to be discussing the new normal. And to me, it all sounds like, we're going to be living behind our desks all day and on Zoom meetings and wear masks, and nobody can see my pretty face unless I take it off. And it just sounds really sad. But I found a really compelling article on the new normal, and basically the title was there's nothing new about the new normal, okay? And this is by one Chime Asone. He was a former senior specialist on sustainable development goals, and he wrote this for the World Economic Forum. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph. It says, as the pandemic rages on, this was written a while ago, somewhere in 2020, it gives us a chance to reimagine the world by tracing history, not forgetting it. We should revel in the discomfort of the current moment to regenerate a new paradigm, not a new normal. Feeling unsettled, destabilized, and alone can help us empathize with individuals who have faced systemic exclusions long ignored by society, even before the rise of COVID-19, thus stimulating urgent action to improve their condition. For these communities, things have never been normal. And really, that's what we've been saying, that there's nothing that has been normal about the communities that we live in and the systemic racism that we've had to deal with, and the health inequalities that we've had to cope with that have flared up during COVID. And we really want to talk about what this new normal is for us. And my first question would be that COVID brought along with it a new way of life for us all. And as we adjust to the new normal, there are still so many uncertainties, especially for minority ethnic communities like ours. What do you think the future holds for us in this new normal?
Wow.
Okay. I think there are 3 things. I think there are 3 really clear areas.
We're right, okay. Robert goes first, then me, then Roger.
The first thing is this. Look, I think that one of the things it's made us aware is how much we need each other. And that doesn't matter what colour you are, what class you are, what sexual orientation you are, what kind of politics you have. It's made us all aware of how valuable human touch is, how valuable it is to be around other people. Look, even in the context of church, it made us aware of how just worshipping together, just being around other people of faith has been so powerful. So I think it's brought that to the fore, that we really, really need each other, that we are social animals, social creatures, and we need to be around each other, and that without that, it dramatically impacts on our quality of life. And for many people, it's destroyed their mental health.
Yeah.
Not being around other people. So I think that's the first thing. Really, really made us aware of how important that is. I think for Black people, it's made us aware of how the inequalities that we face are still there, whether there is COVID or no COVID. You know, Black Lives Matter, the whole death of George Floyd made us just brought to the fore the way in which racialized oppression is still a feature of modern life, especially in austerity Britain before COVID. It's also made us aware of how we're more vulnerable to premature death as a consequence of COVID. So all of those kind of things have been brought to the fore for us in terms of being aware of that. But I think there's something else, you know, which is COVID has been like a case that the whole experience has kind of cleared the air. It's given some people an opportunity to think, you know, and the air has actually been cleaner in many respects. There's so many cars on the road and various other forms of pollution. So I think in many respects, it's been, to use biblical language, it's been apocalyptic. It has actually been an unveiling of the way in which the world works. But it's also, using another biblical concept, a kairos moment. And kairos moment is a moment when God breaks into human history to reveal something new. And so I want to think about the future in that way. It's unveiled to us some home truths about human nature, some home truths about the social world in which Black people have to navigate, but also it's given us time to think and think of new ways in which we can operate, be community, develop ourselves as individuals. That's the Kairos moment part of it. So I think of it in those ways, apocalyptic and also a Kairos moment, revolutionary moment for transform the way in which we can live, think and be.
So, you know, in Romans, when it talks about, I think it's in Romans 12, when it says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Would you say there's some of that there then, right? And I've got to be conscious here because it feels like we're all in awe of you at the minute, Robert. We're all like, oh. But I mean, it's you know, there's something in that for me that I do think, you're right. There's his sovereignty, as I see my faith, and sometimes I think, am I simplifying it? Well, no, for me, God is sovereign, but he's a loving God, and it's been an opportunity to really, yes, have your mind transformed. The dilemma is, as Robert's just shared there, and I'm sure we'll talk about, what's that been transformed to? Because this world structure was so much around twofold. It was either all about me, I need it today, I've got to have it today, you know, we can't wait, we've got to get through to but if we want to, you know, have a burger, we've got to drive through, we can't wait, we need it now. All of that came and then suddenly it stopped. And so that, of course, has messed with people's mental state. And therefore, how do you put that in? How do we then see that verse from a Christian standpoint that says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, to what? And that's what I think is going to be part of this challenge of whatever this new normal is. Because I would hope, and I want an expectation, that people would look at it from a genuine spiritual aspect, that God is trying to, he's not trying, because you don't have to try, but he's choosing to say, this is an opportunity for you to look at your life very differently and get rid of some of the trappings that this world has said are important to you.
Yeah, I think that's true. How many people in this discussion? Is it 3 of us or 2 of us? Are you the guys chipping in? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Roger, oh, no.
I'm gonna try and chip
Roger's
in.
next.
But I would say, to be honest, Robert, like I would say, you know, 100% agree with you. I think that this season also, you know, for me, I'm in my mid-40s, so I'm in my mid-40s now, and I've always been quite. You know, I left school just looking at computer screens. We never had internet at school, and I think you guys probably
we never had it.
You know what I'm saying? So first time I saw internet was at university, and the children I teach laugh at me because they're like, they can't imagine life without the internet. Now, so for me, it's always been a situation where I have to always change and be fluid. Now, I never realized how many of us can't change, because you know, I'm self-employed. You have to, if you stop, you know, you finish. So I find this season as a great season because it's a bit of a leveler as well, because I feel that a lot of times people just carried on doing things, businesses carried on and still had the structures in place because it worked. They never really looked at it. This season has forced everybody to look at the structures, whether it's spiritually, whether it's economically, whether it's physically as well. A lot of people have had a look at themselves and said, you know what? I am actually overweight. So I need to actually sort myself out because I need to change my mentality with that. So everyone's had a time now to have a look. If you can't change in this period now, you would never change. You know what I mean? Because we've literally had a down tools period, and I'm concerned, and that's why mental health is an issue, is because now the people that can't change are now within our groupings, within our family, it showed our was overly reliant on somebody drip feeding us the word in religious circumstances, and not actually reliant and actually developing a journey on ourselves.
But I'd say that was,
you know,
the society on a whole was reliant on drip feeding us. So even in the time that we've had this mixture of some of us saying, the government says, right, we're all on lockdown. You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to stand for myself. I'm going to go out and do. And then the next minute, well, I'm not, until they tell me whether or not I can have the vaccine, or until they tell me whether I can go to the shops, I'm not doing it. So it's really opened up that conversation of, who are you actually believing and reliant on? Where has your own thinking come from? Because for all this, I'm my, you know, a bit like the old Whitney Houston song or Shaka Khan, I'm every woman. Of course, you know, being politically correct, I'm every person. You know, it's all in me. Well, actually, you realise it's not all in you. As Robert, you said, we've realised we need each other. How we need each other, though, I think going forward is going to be the challenge. Robert?
Well, I think when we get out of this, there's going to be a massive explosion in terms of creativity, in terms of people just letting loose. And the evidence from previous pandemics supports that. After the influenza pandemic of the early 1920s, we had the Roaring Twenties. You know, so there's going to be an explosion in creativity, explosion in ideas and human relationships. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening. So what will be interesting for the church context and people of faith is how they respond to that. You know, people are going to come out of this wanting change, wanting something new, wanting something dynamic. And I think what it says to us is that you can't keep doing things the same. Because people are going to want the same anyway. So, you know,
But can the gospel be delivered though? This is the thing, isn't it? Can the gospel be delivered in this change? That's the challenge that I think you alluded to as well, Roger. How do they deliver the gospel? How do we share it? In this raw, as you just
but the new normal, whatever the new normal is, it's called, for me, it sounds really harsh, yeah? The thing is, it's like, you know, we're so traditional and stuck in our ways. It's the harshness it's not about how the gospel gets delivered or how the messages get delivered. It's if the people receive the new forms of the message. It's the same message, but it's accepting new forms. So when you change the style of music, and you can look at music going it from a perspective of outside of gospel, just message, because music is about transforming a message. Now, you've got older people that might say, oh, that hip hop is so, you know what I mean, whatever. But the reality show is that was a message that people was trying to communicate in a form which is relatable to a generation. Now, big people sometimes like the hip hop and was able to accept it. So whatever form that's come forward, people need to accept. Like, my parents never really touched Zoom beforehand, you know, and they never had a clue about Zoom. I see my dad now running Zooms on, you know, because he's forced to go on Zoom, and it's like a case of he could be ignorant and just shrivel up and be forced. But the thing is, we have to say, listen, get over it. I've said to my boss, I ain't coming into work for no meeting, driving in for 1 hour when I could just easily do it on Teams and Zoom. You know, come on, let's be a bit more wiser. Let's be more economical.
But then we could buy into that message, Robert. I don't know what you think to this about, but that it's they're using it as a way to control us. If we get everybody on Zoom and we get everybody on Teams, nobody's going to want to walk out and meet physically. I mean, what do you subscribe to some of that, Robert? Do you think?
Nah, not at all. I don't think it's about controlling people at all. I think that what it has done is made the world smaller and been able to access discussions and seminars and conferences all over the world that I wouldn't have had access to before, because people just put things online. So I think one good thing that's come out of this is the communication network, how it's enabled all of us to find ways in which we can subvert having to use the telephone or even 100%. The mobile phone and have face-to-face conversations online. I think it's going to be a major tool going forward for education, because whether you're running a university department or a school now, you realise that you don't necessarily have to have everybody there in the classroom to be able to deliver the lectures. That's going to have profound financial implications. However, one of the things that has come out of this, although it's made the world smaller and made us all much more interactive, is that you still need human touch.
Yes.
You cannot undervalue or marginalise the importance of being in front of people and having that kind of spontaneity and that kind of dynamism. So I don't believe it's about controlling people. I think it's a real opportunity. And look, it's benefited a whole heap of churches. There were churches that only used to have 3 people and a cat attend on a Sunday morning. All of a sudden, because we're online, there's hundreds of people tuning in.
Yeah, for real.
It provided a whole new platform for people to do church in creative ways. And maybe what church people need to learn from this is that you can take that same kind of adaptivity into the Sunday morning. Maybe you have to do things completely different to engage people, talk about the message of Jesus. Maybe you don't need to have, a sermon in a traditional sense. Maybe you have these songs that people sing. Maybe you have to use the building in the same way. So it's provided us with real opportunities for rethinking how one communicates faith, how one deals with communicating across borders, across frontiers, and how you organize. Because one of the things that's going to come out of this as well is people have used online to organize, to get savvy, to protest, to resist. So I think there's going to be a whole explosion in that activities going forward. So, sorry, I want to jump on it. Sorry. Right, because we're looking at the new normal, yeah? Do you feel that the new normal is going to be new for, because obviously this is geared up for black people,
do you think there's going to be a new breed? Because I feel, to be honest, I've mentioned before on my shows that I've done outside of this, and I've mentioned that there's going to be a new breed of, I would say, black people within their community that just like this, it has to stop here. So I believe the new normal for within our community, where I thought was passive, very passive in our community, and almost case of just leave it to the noisy Rasta man if they say something, to now a lot of angry. I find within my generation now, we're all angry because we're like this. Hold on a second. We was told because of our dads, because we've talked about it in a football context, we was told to accept the rubbish, you know what I mean, that we would face throughout the years, the racism and watching it on TV. We said to face it, just take it, just shut up and take it, and now we're like this, nah, we're not taking it anymore now. This needs to stop, and we're not letting it to come out of light. And I find that there's going to be, in terms of the black community, the new norm, it may not be as comfortable for us, and it needs to be uncomfortable, because I refuse, this is my perspective, to see my sons go through what I have to go through. And I'm hearing it from the mouths of black and white people that it's almost okay for us to accept 3 times, 4 times more black people in mental health institutions. Oh, it's okay for 10 times more of a population in normal circulation that's in prisons. We're like this. No, it's not acceptable. And we're going to not only people outside of the church, we're going to church, and if you don't say nothing, I'm out the doors, mate. Because my Bible actually says, we're meant to be engaging in social. Exactly. We're meant to look after. So you're looking after Susan, who can't afford to put something on a finger. But if my sons are guaranteed to get battered around the corner because of their colour, you're gonna stand there and go, "Okay, we're all gonna go to heaven." Like, nah. So I find that there's gonna be a new normal. Yes, whatever the change will be, but I don't feel that it's gonna be a comfortable ride within a black community, because we're like this. We are not letting this go. This is not an American problem. This is the worldwide problem, and I, that's just me where I'm at, because if it's not, if this guy has to make it not normal, I will make it not normal. You know what I'm saying?
And again, I suppose the for me, behind some of that though is about how we empower. How are we now going to be empowered to make sure that message carries on? And that when we've seen, in particular, we know, obviously, as you said, rightly so, the UK, but because of what happened with George Floyd last year, and then the stories of all the other young American, not just even young, but just black Americans who were dying and being shot and killed and murdered in the way that they had. Even when I was listening to Michelle Obama's book again, and listening to her just reel off all these names, my thing now is, how are we going to be empowered to encourage your son, my daughter, Robert as well, our children who now are kind of anybody aged 12 to 25. They're the generation that are there who are going to see. You're just in there, Angela. Do you know what I mean? They're the ones who are now, and the fact that saddens me that they expect. I'm listening to a BBC colleague who I'm sure Robert knows him very well, Dotun Adebayo, who's talked about his daughter, who he was sitting there thinking, shall we talk about this? This is the elephant in the room. Should we mention George Floyd? And she was like, well, it's no biggie. That happens to me all the time. And he was so upset. Genuinely, and I remember hearing him cry on 5 Live going, I can't believe that my 19-year-old thinks this is the norm. And we thought, as you were rightly saying, Roger, we thought we changed some of that narrative. We thought by having the Ian Wrights or the Thierry Henrys, mentioning the Gunners had to come in there with some of the football. We thought when we had those guys, it would change. They wouldn't have to deal with it. They were going to school and it would be all a different pattern. But my concern is, how do you empower them? What can we be saying to our young people?
I think it's a really, really important point in terms of the new normal. I think, first of all, in terms of the church, we've got to acknowledge that the black church tradition is conservative. What I mean by that is it's fundamentally concerned with individual empowerment, maybe a little bit of self-help, and fundamentally about you pulling yourself up by your own spiritual bootstraps. That's not a radical agenda. A radical agenda is to critique the system, the structures outside the church, and be looking for ways in which you can dismantle it, disrupt it, tear it down. That's a revolutionary approach. Jesus was a bit of both.
Yes.
On the one hand, there's sin within the individual. You need to clean up your life. But Jesus also confronted the system, the religious system, and more importantly, the political system of Roman rule. So the problem with the black church in Britain is it's only doing half of the gospel. It doesn't do the revolutionary social critique that's necessary. So I don't personally think that mainstream black church is going to help with the new normal. It's going to do business as usual. And what that means now is promote more of this prosperity doctrine stuff, this come we all get along, happy days, kumbaya stuff, and not deal with the kind of critical structural issues that you need to challenge to make the difference. It's going to organize people to vote and protest against police harassment, against the lack of resource for black mental health. It isn't going to do that. Instead, it's going to empower individuals to pray more, to fast more, to be more diligent, so that them and their family and the church members can flourish. That's what I call in God of the Rotted, selfish faith. The faith that is just concerned with the body, the individual body and the body of Christ is problematic.
Yeah.
But then, so how do we develop something that's much more revolutionary and transformative? Well, I think, practically speaking, it's only going to happen on the fringes. And those fringes have now moved beyond the church to these protest movements where people are clued up. So in many respects, the people doing the prophetic work of God, challenging structural evil, the sin that's in the system, aren't church people. It's Black Lives Matter. It's people within political organizations. It's people fighting the environmental crisis that confronts us. Those issues evade black church tradition. So for me, it ain't going to come out of the church. If you want, the church might be good for your spiritual, individual spiritual. It might be a base camp experience, but in order to climb the mountain, you've got to find other tools and other people and other resources to go forward. So I'm not very hopeful about the church coming out of the new normal in a way that's going to challenge the structural injustice that we've seen lick us in the face as a result of COVID, as a result. It isn't going to do that. It isn't tooled up to do that kind of work.
But the thing is, to be honest, sorry to interject there, yeah? I totally agree with what your statement is. The church ain't going to change. Yeah, the mass, the traditions will try and carry on how they've always carried on. That's how they see coming out the new normal. Yes, we're going to meet 9 till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever they do on a Sunday, and we're still going to do. But I do feel that this season now, for a generation, their respect to the guy in the pulpit, he was their prime influencer, has now moved to other influencers via other platforms. So the power of YouTube, not conspiracies and WhatsApp, take that separately, but people are educating via platforms, what we're doing right now through podcasts and whatever. And what's happening now is I've kind of developed, even with my own sons, to say, listen, I'll go through different podcast guys who I listen to, and I'll say, look, this is the challenging thought of these areas. These are challenging areas as an individual, as a community area, who are bringing truth to the table. Exactly what you're saying. But what I find, where they only had 5% of the, not even 5%, probably 2% influence on people, I believe that has gone up due to, for that generation, that's probably gone into over 50 to 60 to 70%. The online influencers of 25s, 15 to 25-year-old is massive. And that's why I feel that the foundations, because remember, there's an age gap in our traditional gathering, which is the church. And the gap goes from late 50s all the way down to 25, because me and my brethren, we're not going to traditional black churches, so we had to show is when they go back, they're not going to see the kids. That's the talk that I'm hearing right now. They're not going to see them. And if they see them, it's not in an engaging way. Yeah. So that's why the new norm for the community will be different, because BLM has rocked it. And
and just in general, even, of course, we know here more recently, having lost, through our church connections, that Keon who had his life taken, and that and that again, they're 14, 15. So you're right, they're in that bracket of how are you going to tap into them. I mean, it's interesting because it's made me think about me. It's made me sit here and think, actually, I was brought up, although I'd say in a where I could think for myself, I actually still have fundamentally a conservative foundation. No, because when we were radical, Robert, and there was a few of us in our late teens, and we were radical because we went to university, and there was a big thing that you don't go to university, and you definitely don't write, Jesus is dread and God of the Rati. You didn't even use that word, hallelujah. And so this is the thing. You're right. What can somebody in my age group? I'm a middle class woman. I'm a middle class black woman. I did what I was told to do. Robert, we did that, didn't we? We went and made sure we went to uni. We got pieces of paper. We held down a career. We saw the systems and the structure we were in, but again, keep my head down. Get upset sometimes when I thought, well, how come they haven't promoted me? But they promoted Sarah, and I've got more experience than her. And again, a bit like you said, Roger, and I kind of took it and and I think bizarrely, you're right, saying now coming out and working for myself and coming away from the structure, you realise, oh my gosh, I was so seriously indoctrinated in a belief system that now I'm struggling. Don't want to use the word struggling, but it's making me question. The Jesus I serve isn't the Jesus in that Bible anymore. And I have a daughter and her friends who will be saying, I don't see that Jesus. And we're coming on the other side where I don't want her to be presented with, just pray about it. It will just pray about it over.
I would say, I think it's a really good point again. But I think that the issue is we were taught not to see that revolutionary Jesus.
Yes.
The revolutionary Jesus is there. The problem is that one, colonial Christianity, where our ancestors first encountered Christianity, said two things to black people. Don't think about your faith and you can't change the world. 400 years later, we don't do critical intellectual work around the Bible. We're more likely to trust somebody who hasn't been to seminary than somebody who has been to seminary to study the Bible. And secondly, we don't do protest. That was colonial Christianity. That's what it said. Don't think about your faith, you can't change the world. So we were brought up and raised with a colonial Jesus, the white Jesus with the blonde hair and blue eyes. The revolutionary Jesus, who was always in the text, was a Jesus who confronted the authorities. But we weren't taught to read it that way. When we read the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus is saying, give them bread, because the Romans were starving the people, we thought it meant spiritual bread. When Jesus said, cancel their debts because they were in debt to the Roman authorities, they were in debt to the temple authorities, and the people were therefore impoverished, we thought that just meant sin. To give us that, no, Jesus was talking about the material conditions that people were facing. So a Jesus who challenged discrimination, a Jesus who challenged structural oppression was there. So one of the things that we have to do for the new normal is read the Bible in a new way, because that Jesus has already been there. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, what do? People of God, we're going to have to create new spaces for that next generation, because I don't think the traditional church space is going to work. We need to be thinking about what para-church groups need to be established going forward for these new, to capture this energy and enthusiasm that's going to be there, because you can guarantee two things. You might get a few black church pastors who talk about this. Jonathan Jackson at the Rock, possibly. Will do, sorry. Maybe a few others. Because remember, the black pastors said nothing when George Floyd died. They all said everything a few weeks ago. Last week, they all couldn't clamour quickly enough to support the government to tell black people to take the vaccine. I think it's more clamouring to say racism is a problem, Boris Johnson. So we know that they don't have the moral courage to resist the oppression. They're too cowardly. Most of the black clergy, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to race and racism, they're powerful in the pulpit, but they're a mouse on the street. I prefer it to be the other way around. I prefer to be a mouse in the pulpit and powerful on the street. Wow. They're not going to do it. If you're black in a mainstream church, which mixed church with white leadership, they ain't going to do it, because they're going to upset the pseudo anti-racism apple cart that they're on. Because most of those churches with white leadership and mixed congregations aren't doing a great deal to empower black people. If they were, the leadership would be black. I've seen black churches where the majority of the people in the congregation are black people, and the leadership is all white. How is that? What's that say about heaven? What's heaven going to be like, a ghetto? Black people in the kitchen cleaning? So we're not going to get it from those mainstream places at all. So for me, the hope going forward, what I have to do is create those spaces, those para-church spaces. Now, we're doing that practically. We're doing it in terms of the work that we do at Queen's. nearly 70 black students, many of them young people, now coming back to study theology because, as I mentioned before, colonial Christianity said, don't think you can't change the world.
Yeah.
What we have to do to decolonize is make sure that we create those spaces where people can do some critical thinking, but also provide the vehicle for direct action, for community organizing, for empowering people. So for me, my hope coming out of this, my challenge is to help create those new parachurch spaces.
Because hearing that, and this is, I'm thinking about those young people that are, and I can't even, sometimes I say young people, but even for anyone in those communities that have always been socioeconomically poorer, for us here in Birmingham, well, I'm thinking of anything within 3 miles of the city centre ring, from your King Standings, Castle Vales through to your Chelmsley Woods, Handsworth,
11 route,
the 11 route, all in that sense. Yeah. So listening to you, Robert, that's the challenges. There we're going like, what? I don't know what you're talking about that for, fam. I ain't got no interest in that, fam. How do we put these kind of conversations in that space, because they probably don't feel remotely empowered. They don't feel educationally able because the school structures mash up anyway now in that sense. And then we're told they need to run back into a mainstream. I'm like, hang on a second, you're running back into a mainstream and emotionally their well-being is paramount, but slightly different story. What could we say to the likes of, and again, stereotypically, a Kashan or a Kwame or a Devante, to say that's what we want you to do? Can you think about theology, think about Jesus in that sense? Because we've never spoken about that properly in those everyday circles.
You can do it. Yeah, you can do it through gospel music.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the biggest
Extra, the extra.
Look, that's the problem. The problem is gospel music in Britain has reproduced the colonial theology of the church. You can go from gospel music from 1960 to 2021, and they find 2 examples where any gospel artist has ever dared to challenge the structures. There's only one gospel album produced in 1970, Out of Darkness, where they actually speak about racism. Just imagine that. Stephen Lawrence gets killed, and black gospel music not singing about racism. 1970s, go back a generation. Handsworth is burning, Brixton is burning. Yeah. What do you get from gospel music? Fill my cup, Lord. LCG's in.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, Stephen Lawrence gets killed. All of that tragedy. What do you get from gospel music? Crossover, power. You get they're all trying to do crossover music. Brian Powell, New Colours. They're all doing that. Now, they're slightly more aware of it. Early turn of the century, Jahaziel talks about the crisis within the hood, but his response is colonial Christianity. Individual salvation, take care of yourself, Jesus will save you. No, fight the system. So the problem we've got is the most diffuse communication network for engaging young people with what it means to know the liberating Saviour is colonial. It's gospel music. Look what happens. Grenfell Tower, bun up. What do we get next from gospel music? We get the Kingdom Choir with the 12 best love songs that something inside so strong, or just reproducing a whole range of pop songs.
Yes.
In essence, nothing to say about Grenfell Tower, but who spoke about it? Stormzy.
Yeah, Stormzy. In fact, when you said that, Still Pulse did it when it was Handsworth Revolution.
So what I'm saying is, the problem is, we know gospel music is for young people. It's under 30s. Old people just don't absorb it. That's what the statistics say. So I would say part of the challenge is, how do we get these gospel artists to become what sociologists call the organic intellectuals, the people who will see what's happening around them and articulate it for that generation, and articulate it in a way that enables them to struggle and change the way things are. That's the challenge. So for me, the whole gospel music scene needs a whole new generation of artists who are willing to speak truth to power. And that's why we made Jamaican Bible Remix, 10 songs, all looking at what the Bible has to say about challenging structural injustice in the world. Not because we're great musicians. I mean, I can't sing to save a bean, to save my life. But what we wanted to do was demonstrate how it was possible to use this brilliant genre, this mouthpiece of the church, to engage young people. So that's how it can be done. Get the gospel artists to actually decolonize their theology and create songs that actually speak to the crisis. That's the problem.
And to stick a pin, I do think, thankfully, with what we're doing here, I say what we're doing here, but being part of the team for Affinity Extra, I'm actually pleased that I'm hearing a little bit more of that radical, revolutionary tone, especially more so in the hip hop artists that are coming out. Would you not say?
I would say, but I feel that. Oh my goodness! I know we're running out of time, and you know what? You just opened a massive door there, because the reality show is that there's two journeys, and I've been talking to Angela about this. There's the colonial journey for West Africans, and there's the slave journey of Caribbean offspring, which are two different conversations, and that's another whole and
because that again, sorry Roger, will be again a conversation about what this new norm is, because for black people we've had our idea, we've had our eyes open to actually there is a difference between black Caribbean, black British Caribbean, black African, black mixed Caribbean with African, the mix of generally understanding that mix. Much, so you're right. So the twofold of there'll be gospel music is great if you think of it as a generic thing and say, yes, it can be used. But actually, you're right. How do those different artists who are bringing it talk about their particular experience? And can we own? Because we've had these conversations before and it's slightly digressing. But
I think you're right. Look, there's black diversity, but that's always been the way.
Yeah.
My parents came from different Caribbean islands.
But we haven't had the opportunity to celebrate it. I think in the new norm, it feels like we can do.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, I think that, on the one hand, there is that black diversity, that multiplicity. We know we've all come from different places, but also there needs to be a sense of togetherness, because we know that unless we act together, we're not going to resist some of these forces of non-being or things that people want to terrorize the community. So I think that there is that recognition of the difference. But going back to the music, the African stuff is worse. If you're looking at West African Christian music in Britain, it's even more colonial than the Caribbean stuff. So I mean, so if you're looking at their songs are dealing fundamentally with listen, there's a PhD this on this.
And he's right as well. He's right.
Pauline Muir went and listened to the songs within West African churches in London, highly about transcendence and about God being great and over there. Very little about immanence and what God means within this context, and also preaching a cryptic Ponzi scheme gospel. The more you give to the church, God's going to work that way in the Bible. You know what I mean?
Too many tables being shaken.
So look, that's the challenge.
Yes.
It is with the musicians. Now, here's what going forward, the musicians need to decolonize, read the books, educate themselves so they can craft music that conveys a God who is a God of justice, a God who is inclusive, a God who's revolutionary, is going to move black people on from where they find themselves. Without that, it's pointless. For me, it just becomes, it shouldn't even be called gospel music, it should be called lifestyle music, because it's just presenting a particular lifestyle that isn't actually representing the fullness of the gospel.
Drop the mic.
Okay, all right.
Drop the mic.
Sorry, Angela. You there? Sorry.
Angela, you are here.
You say how are you feeling? Obviously, you're hearing a lot of strong opinions going on here. So, from your perspective,
a lot of the narratives I'm aware of are being challenged, and especially being African and coming to the UK and trying to, engage with the Afro-Caribbean, African mix and, understand the dynamics of relationships and start to think about things in a way that I've never thought about before. Because where I come from, nobody's racist towards me, I don't have to deal with systemic racism at any point in time in my life. But when after the whole George Floyd thing happened, I called my big brother who lives in the US and I asked him, have you had to deal with this before? And he starts to tell me, and I'm like, why have I never asked you this question? Because it didn't seem like it was an issue for me ever.
Big.
My mind was blown because I'm like, I've never had to have these conversations. And I kept saying that every time people started to say, okay, the BLM movement and how do you feel? I'm like, I don't know how to relate. To be honest, I don't know what to say. And I can't feign
an explanation.
I know where you've
experience.
been.
Yeah,
I just feel bad that I never really understood where everybody else was coming from. Even though, I mean, I've grown up in a family where my father was radical. My father was radical Christian. My father had a newspaper called The Watchman, where he wrote about every false prophet and every bad thing that was happening in the country. So I've always had that, radical thinking. But when it comes to like really challenging the systems within the church, we've always been told to be quiet. Don't ask God questions. Don't say anything. Well, not in my family. We always get in trouble for that, So I've always had that, idea. But thinking about it from, such a very different perspective with regards to the fact that I live in the UK now, and I'm part of the Black community, and that has the Afro-Caribbean diversity, where we have to have conversations about slavery and colonialism that nobody wants to talk about, where we have to have conversations about mental health and the church that nobody wants to talk about. Like, there's like so many things ticking in my head, and you don't really have anybody to talk about these things with, because nobody wants to have the conversation.
But here's the thing, just to throw this in, but much of that is due to the fact that we have allowed our pastors not to be properly trained. Yes. If you're looking at somewhere like Birmingham, the number of Black pastors with a degree level qualification in theology would be what? Less than 10%? 15%? I mean, that's really, really, really low. So we've allowed solipsism, the institutionalization of ignorance within the pulpit. Because if your pastor then doesn't understand how counseling works, if they don't actually understand what the biblical text has to say about well-being, mental health, if they can't read the Bible to connect with environmental degradation, they can't read the Bible in a way that connects with family breakdown in Black communities, then that's because they haven't been trained properly. So we've got to ask ourselves, how have we allowed these people, and often it's men who are very poorly qualified, to lead congregations with highly qualified Black women? When I go into ministry, I think, my goodness, there are Black women in here with PhDs. And the pastor has, doesn't even have O-level equivalent in terms of religion, religious studies. How can that be? I'm not being snobby because it's my field. I'm just saying, listen, if I go tomorrow to the doctor and say, doctor, my regular doctor, I've got a pain in my chest and it's hurting me. And I say to the doctor, where did you study to get your medical qualification? If that medical doctor says to me, I never studied, I just watched other people and they said I was good at it, I'm gone. Oh my gosh. That's my physical body. Yeah. Listen, check this out.
Yeah.
Those ministers are asked to do spiritual surgery, which is more important, and yet they're least qualified.
Yeah.
So one of the things we can do for the new normal going forward straight away is say, Pastor, have you been trained properly? If you haven't been trained properly, find yourself a theological college or go on a course and be trained properly, because we cannot go on being misled and being led by somebody who isn't sufficiently qualified.
And I think, and that will be a genuine shift if we, as a congregation, I know, like you know, when we've spoken, I know I'll be careful, it's about that challenge of saying, why would I continue to go to that place when I know they can't articulate the Bible? And hence why so many people, as you rightly said, Roger, have turned to the podcast, have found a range of pastors or teachers really who share the word and open, especially for me, I must have listened to about 4 on a regular basis, from a kind of traditional hallelujah to a, can you think about what you're doing? And that, for me, then says, so why would I need this particular male, as you rightly said, Roger, in the norm, standing there telling me, when I've been opened my eyes to understand, a simple example for me at the moment about the wrath of God. Right, so there's a lot of this, as we said, and people are going, oh, this is God sending down his punishment. He's look at this and and it's all fire and brimstone. And actually, when I've listened to this particular teaching, in fact, I'll say his name, Tony Evans, and he said, no, that's the wrath of God is currently present. He's just given it over to you. He's given it over to us. There's an element of, he said, you've got choice. The Old Testament way of the wrath of God is what probably we were brought up with, where you're just going to get beaten out of it, and you can't talk to that person. It's fire and brimstone is going to lick you down. in the New Testament, from what I've read for me personally, was actually God said, I said I was here. I'm open for you to choose me. If you don't choose me, there will be consequences that you have to make a decision about. I can't force that.
It's true, Nikki, but here's the problem with that.
Yeah.
And this is how I think the coloniality works, right?
Yeah,
That's
please.
what we're taught to, right? But here's the problem, right? If this is about the wrath of God, how come it's disproportionately affected the poor people? Poor people in the world, poor people in Britain.
That's
what people have been fine.
Yeah,
you know,
and that's because the
really, it's not about the wrath of God. It's about the wickedness of the system.
Yes,
and therefore, if we are people affected, we've got to challenge the system. Because the system disproportionately impacts people of color, people who are poor, people who are working poor, the people who suffered, people who are losing their jobs right now. We know that the richest have got richer.
And again, as you said, the word talks about that, doesn't it? Yeah.
We've got to look at how the economic system works within this world and be a context to critique that.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. And I think that's the thing. Politically, that's the move that we need to go through. That you're right. Yeah. You know, okay, that's it's not a simple one, but in the sense of there is a wrath that he's saying it's up to you to change. And I think you're right. That's the challenge that many of us don't want to, because we want to make sure, I just want to make sure my little garden is looking lovely and crisp for the summer. I don't want to look across and see, actually, how comes 2 neighbours down the road, theirs doesn't look that good, and I could actually go and help them. That's from a simple community standpoint, but also politically, you know, yes, Robert, you're right. How do we say, this isn't fair that all the black children in a school are always the ones who are ending up being put on the pupil referral unit list, and I'm seeing them coming in and they're permanently excluded, and I'm like, what's wrong with this? And then I realise, well, the majority of the school, from the head teachers to the cleaner, were white. How do I speak to that?
I would say for myself, because I know we're going to stay over time, but for myself, I've always really came, and it breaks my heart, because I grew up, I haven't really had any time out from church and whatever, but it breaks my heart to see that you know, that we as a community don't see the power of, and I'm trying to break out wider than a community than me as an individual, that we as the fulcrum for our community have failed on a social and economical and political level, that and not prepared still to this day to lift up our hands and go, you know what, it's our fault. And for me now, got the new normal will have, I believe, embers of fire burning in certain grounds, because I can't see it carrying on, because I this is my personal belief, is that, you know, that people are getting, I don't know what we call the word woke or whatever, people are really opening their eyes. This lockdown has enabled us to look in the mirror, and
I suppose take responsibility. That it's an opportunity to say, yes, as an individual, I've got to look at myself, but ultimately it's still about, can I take responsibility that I'm part of this? I want to be, you know, a part of the problem. So how can I take responsibility to be part of the solution and genuinely come up with some change? Yeah,
and let's do it. So the new normal is not going to be it's going to be warm. That's what I reckon.
No, I think here's the reality. The reality is, for the let's think of it this way. For the vast majority of our history within this country, the black church tradition has been a conservative institution that has maintained a black respectability. And that's where it's going to continue. It's only going to be at the fringes. And for people who generally want change, it's going to be the parachurch groups where there's going to be any kind of radical change. So if you want to be part of a new normal that is revolutionary, you're going to have to leave the mainstream and establish something different, because it's going to be back to normal. What they're going to do is going to have Thanksgiving services. Everybody's going to have Thanksgiving service, say thank you, and maybe a few memorials for people who have passed. But in terms of challenging the structural inequality that COVID has made us all aware of, the black impoverishment, the deliberate structural attempts in the NHS, in other industries to keep black people in particular, that church ain't going to trouble that, because it hasn't got this. We haven't trained the pastors.
Yes, they won't be able to. And I think that's the thing.
That's true. So for me, the new normal for the black church, vast majority, will be business as usual, and business as usual in the current climate means you are signing your own death warrant. You will disappear. because that kind of business as usual approach has very little traction in the years in the age that we're living in, and what's going to happen in the future.
Drop the mic again.
All right, we can't start
again. We can't start again. I've got things to do, people to see. I have to go start up my garden. I forget about everybody else.
But but part of it, look, maybe part of it is that you know, in terms of the radio work that you're doing, you run series on, program specials. You do work on how you can transform the church and looking at these parachurch groups. It's happening in other places in the world. It's only, Britain is not unique in that sense. There are other places where people have had to wrestle with this and come up with new ways of thinking about church, new categories of thought, ways of describing the life of faith in order to engage new generations. I often point people to two studies that some of my students have done over the years. One is one that we did with Barack Obama's old church, Trinity United Church of Christ. Just get the kind of things that they're doing. 10, 11 ministries to young people under the age of 15. A church building that when you go into it, what's the motto of the church? Barack Obama went to this church for 20 years. Unashamedly black, unapologetically Christian. Everybody in the stained glass windows are black. Barack Obama's old church. Affirm black lives, black bodies from the moment that you walk within there. I made a film about it 10 years ago. It's called God Bless You, Barack Obama, where we just spent time at the church he went to, listened to his minister preach about what kind of sermons he was listening to. So there are people who have wrestled with this, and this is why it's even more problematic for our context. You've got all the resources a button away online where people have grappled with this. Look, James Cone started talking about this stuff in the late 1960s, Black liberation theology. How do you combine faith with revolutionary blackness? First book written in 1969. African Americans have been talking about this and doing this kind of work. Even they, with all of that, got left behind in the wake of Black Lives Matter. So they're having to catch up now. But the resources are there. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe if you ran a book reading series just on 10 books to transform the black community or black church, that can be a start. Start with Black Theology and Black Power, James Cone, 1969. Develop a reading group around that and see how people respond to it and what comes out of it. So you are the organic intellectuals here. You're the people with the power in terms of the media to push this agenda forward. That's what you should. Where's that's the way the change takes place. Look, we've been doing it in education. Queens, that's 70 black people. That's the largest cohort of black people studying theology anywhere in Western Europe. And end of story. So people are starting to realize this. Young people are starting to realize that they need to be tooled up. I can tell you what, vast majority of them are not going to be pastors. So we've still got a problem with getting these pastors into theological education.
Wow.
All right. Thank you for that podcast series. Hello, welcome to I'm reading a book, Carl. I like that title. I can see it. No, but it's always seriously. No,
it's the way to do it. Have a podcast. Why not have a podcast series on the new black church? Just invite people to talk about what needs to happen in terms of youth ministry, what needs to happen in terms of preaching, in terms of theological education, what kind of narratives should we be talking about? Not talking about prosperity. Maybe we need to be talking about recovery. How do we help black churches, black communities recover? How do we develop a really strong anti-racism theology and rhetoric within our churches, starting by the way in which we speak and teach about identity in the church? Because part of the problem is the churches are ignorant of it. But if you go to many of these mixed churches, they're even more ignorant. Look what happened to the guy at Hillsong. George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, he's saying, it's not an issue for us in Britain. What kind of foolishness is that? Even his own black people who are passive had to call him out and say, actually it is. So part of it is we need, I always say to my students, if you see the problem, you are morally responsible for sorting it out. So if you see this problem, Roger, it's your responsibility.
100. Got it. Yeah, man, I'll receive that.
Affinity Extra. Be extra. Make sure you read a book and don't stand up there if you're passing in and get no training. That's our new strapline.
That's what I tell you. That's what you want to do. Because if you're looking at even organisations like the Black Panthers back in the day, they started with people reading particular books about social transformation. Saul Alinsky's work on community organising. They read left-wing texts on political critique, on challenge. These books are now in the Christian community. And what I mean by that is there are books written by Black scholars on how to deal with issues around race and racism in the Bible.
I tell you,
how to deal with issues around sex and sexism in the biblical text and in the church. Womanist theology. It's all there. There's never been a time when there have been more resources available for people to tool themselves up. Look, even we're talking about mental health. There are black theologians been writing about womanist theologians been writing about mental health in Black church communities 20, 30 years. We just haven't allowed our congregations to access this material. We need bookstores, a book section in the church. That should be Bible study. You need to be read 10 books, everybody. It can be done. If you're in a church context, it can be done.
All that comes to mind right now is studies to show yourself approved. Yeah. That's whether we're academics.
It is that, but also I can tell you what's going to happen. It's there's always a push and then a counter push, called hegemony, counter hegemony in terms of political action. You push for these things, I can guarantee you what your pastor will do is push back. Oh, that's doctrine of demons. Oh, well, this world is not our home, or in more sophisticated language, look, we are the people, we don't see colour here. How can you not see colour and then change things? So you'll find that there's going to be pushback. So the challenge is how we are going to equip people to deal with pushback is coming. Look at Kemi Radendorf saying, attacking intersectionality. Priti Patel attacking Black Lives Matter, saying it's disgusting. That's part of the pushback. So we've got to be able to tool up people to respond. So that's the challenge. It's the challenge of the new normal. So I'm going on a bit. I'm excited about it because I think there will be an outpouring of people desirous for change. And that's the challenge. What are we going to do to capture that? We've all got a responsibility to do something to capture that.
Wow. My God, I've got to catch my bus now, Lord.
But
my head hurting.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you so much, Professor Beckford. This has been mind-blowing. I don't have any words. All I can say is this is my lockdown podcast. We need to do like another one of this, just really talk about this new normal. But the new normal is that there has to be a change. And if you see that there's something wrong, take it as your moral responsibility to fix it. And we're all responsible at this point. Yeah, no one is going to be left behind. So thank you again. Once again, I've been your hostess. My name is Angela, and catch you soon.